Some stories just don't add up. You hear the official version of history, the one in the textbooks. It's neat, it's tidy. But sometimes it feels like a piece is missing. Like reading a book with the most important chapter torn out. Did ancient people really build the pyramids with just ropes and ramps? Why do cultures all over the world, cultures that never met, tell the exact same story about a great flood? And what really happened to all the knowledge stored in the Library of Alexandria? We are told these are just myths. Fanciful stories our ancestors told around a fire. But what if they aren't? What if they are echoes of a history we have forgotten, or a history that has been deliberately hidden? People have been asking these questions for centuries. They're not crazy. They're just looking at the facts and realizing something is off. They see ancient maps that show Antarctica without ice. They find strange objects that look like modern technology, but they're thousands of years old. These are not just random curiosities. They are clues. Clues that suggest the world is much older, stranger, and more mysterious than we are led to believe. The line between myth and history can be blurry. And sometimes the most outlandish stories, the ones dismissed as conspiracy theories, have a disturbing amount of evidence supporting them. They whisper of lost civilizations, hidden knowledge, and powerful groups working in the shadows. Maybe the real conspiracy is the story we've all been told to believe. Number 18. What if we aren't the first advanced civilization on Earth? The story we all learn is a straight line, and humans started in caves. We figured out fire and farming, then cities, then the Industrial Revolution, then the internet. It's a nice simple progression. Each generation gets a little smarter, a little more advanced. But what if that line isn't straight at all? What if it's a circle? What if a sophisticated civilization existed on Earth thousands or even tens of thousands of years before our own recorded history? This isn't about flying saucers, not necessarily. It's about us, humans. Proponents of this idea point to evidence that just doesn't fit the standard timeline. Look at the pyramids of Giza. Mainstream Egyptologists say they were built around 2500 BC with copper chisels and brute force. But the precision is staggering. Some of the stones weighing up to 80 tons are cut in place with a level of accuracy that modern builders would struggle to replicate. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of within 3/60ths of a degree. How? Then you have sites like Pumapunku in Bolivia. The stonework there is even more baffling. It features H-shaped blocks made of diorite, one of the hardest stones on Earth. They are cut with what appear to be machine-like precision with perfectly straight edges and smooth holes. Archaeologists say the Tiwanaku culture did this with stone tools, but many engineers who have studied the site say it's simply not possible. It looks like the work of diamond-tip power tools. The idea gained huge popularity with Eric von Daniken's 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods. He suggested aliens helped ancient humans. But you don't need aliens for this theory to work. A lost human civilization would explain it too. A civilization that was wiped out by a catastrophe like a comet impact or a sudden climate shift. This idea is explored by researchers like Graham Hancock in his book Fingerprints of the Gods. He argues that survivors of this lost civilization, like the mythical Atlantis, traveled the world and passed on their knowledge to hunter-gatherer societies, kickstarting the first known civilizations in Egypt, Sumeria, and Mesoamerica. This would explain why these cultures seem to pop up out of nowhere with advanced knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and architecture. It would explain why so many ancient myths from around the world speak of wise, or civilizing heroes who brought them the tools of civilization. Think of Quetzalcoatl in the Americas or Osiris in Egypt. Maybe they weren't gods. Maybe they were just people. People from a world that was lost beneath the waves or the ice. Of course, the mainstream view is that there is zero physical evidence for a pre-Ice Age civilization of this kind. Where are their cities? Their tools? Their garbage? The counter-argument is that a cataclysm powerful enough to wipe them out would have also wiped out most of the evidence. A massive flood or a shifting of the Earth's crust could bury cities under miles of sediment or sink them to the bottom of the ocean. All we might have left are the most indestructible megalithic structures and the myths that survived in our collective memory. What if the stories of a golden age, a time when humanity was more advanced, are not myths but memories? If such a civilization existed, what kind of technology did they possess? And most importantly, what was the catastrophe that destroyed them? And could it happen again to us? Number 17, did a global flood really wipe the slate clean? Almost every culture on Earth has a flood myth. The story changes a little from place to place, but the core elements are eerily similar. A divine being is angry with humanity. The world is destroyed by a massive flood. A small group of people survive on a boat or by climbing a high mountain. They repopulate the earth. We all know the story of Noah and the Ark from the book of Genesis, but the Sumerians told a similar story thousands of years earlier in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where a man named Utnapishtim builds a great boat to survive a flood sent by the gods. The Greeks had the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha. Hindu mythology tells of Manu, who was warned of a great flood by the god Vishnu. Native American tribes, Australian Aborigines, the people of ancient China all have their own versions. For a long time, historians and scientists dismissed these as just stories, a cautionary tale about displeasing the gods, but the sheer number of them is strange. How could so many disconnected cultures, separated by oceans and thousands of years, all come up with the same basic plot? The conspiracy theory, or perhaps the alternative history, is that these are not myths. They are fragmented memories of a real global cataclysm. This isn't just a fringe idea anymore. In the 1990s, two geologists from Columbia University, William Ryan and Walter Pittman, presented compelling evidence for a massive flood in the Black Sea region. Their research, published in the book Noah's Flood, suggests that around 7,500 years ago, the Mediterranean Sea, swollen by melting glaciers, breached a natural dam at the Bosporus Strait. The result was a cataclysm of unimaginable scale. Water poured into the Black Sea basin, which was then a freshwater lake, with the force of 200 Niagara Falls. The water level rose by hundreds of feet, submerging over 60,000 square miles of land in a matter of months. Entire towns and villages would have been wiped out. The people who lived there and survived would have fled, carrying with them a terrifying story of the day the world was swallowed by water. This story, passed down through generations, could have been the original seed for the flood myths of the Near East, including Noah's. But that only explains the flood myths in that region. What about the ones in the Americas or Australia? This is where the theory gets bigger. Some researchers, like Graham Hancock, connect the flood to the end of the last ice age, around 12,800 years ago. This period, known as the Younger Dryas, was marked by a sudden and dramatic return to ice age conditions. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests this was caused by fragments of a comet hitting the North American ice sheet. This impact would have caused unimaginable devastation. It would have triggered earthquakes, supervolcanoes, and melted a vast amount of the ice cap almost instantly. This would have led to a rapid and catastrophic rise in global sea levels. We're talking about a sea level rise of hundreds of feet, not over centuries, but possibly over weeks or months. This would have been a truly global flood, wiping out coastal civilizations all around the world and leaving only scattered survivors to tell the tale. Geological evidence for such a rapid sea level rise does exist. It's called Meltwater Pulse 1b. The official story is that sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age was gradual, but the sheer universality of the flood myth suggests something more sudden, more terrifying. It suggests a shared trauma imprinted on the memory of our entire species. If a global flood did happen, what did our world look like before it? How many cities, how many cultures now lie 100 meters below the waves off the coasts of India, Japan, or in the Caribbean? And are the ancient stories not just myths, but a warning? Number 16 is the Great Sphinx, much older than we think. The Great Sphinx of Giza is one of the most iconic monuments on the planet. The official story, the one you'll find in any Egyptology textbook, is that it was carved around 2500 BC by the pharaoh Khafra. The face of the Sphinx, they say, is his face. The evidence for this is circumstantial. There are no inscriptions on the Sphinx itself that say who built it or when. The attribution to Khafre comes from the fact that it sits in front of his pyramid and from a nearby temple that contains statues of him. It seems logical, but a compelling and controversial theory argues that the Sphinx is much, much older, perhaps thousands of years older than the pyramids themselves. This idea was first popularized in the 1990s by an independent researcher named John Anthony West. West was intrigued by the unique erosion patterns on the body of the Sphinx. Unlike the other monuments at Giza, which show erosion from wind and sand, the body of the Sphinx and the walls of its enclosure show deep vertical fissures. The West believed this looked like erosion caused by water, specifically by heavy rainfall. The problem is the Giza Plateau has been a hyper-arid desert for the last 5,000 years. There hasn't been enough rain in that time to cause this kind of damage. So West asked a simple question: when was the climate of Egypt wet enough to produce this kind of erosion? He teamed up with Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist and professor at Boston University. Schoch was initially skeptical, but after examining the site, he came to a startling conclusion. The erosion patterns on the Sphinx were, in his professional opinion, classic examples of precipitation-induced weathering. He estimated that for such erosion to occur, the Sphinx would have to have been exposed to a long period of significant rainfall. The last time the Giza Plateau experienced such a climate was before 5000 BC, and perhaps as far back as 7000 BC or even earlier. This would make the Sphinx at least twice as old as mainstream Egyptology claims. This theory, known as the Sphinx water erosion hypothesis, sent shockwaves through the world of Egyptology. The establishment reacted with fury. They argued that Schoch was misinterpreting the evidence. They suggested the erosion could have been caused by other factors, like wind-driven sand saturated with morning dew, or the poor quality of the limestone at the base of the monument. But the theory won't go away, because the visual evidence is so powerful. You can see the difference between the erosion on the Sphinx and the erosion on other structures from Khafre's time. The theory also offers an explanation for a strange anomaly. The head of the Sphinx is disproportionately small for its body. West and Schoch suggested that the original monument was not a human-headed Sphinx at all. It might have been a lion, built to face its celestial counterpart, the constellation of Leo, as it rose on the horizon at dawn on the spring equinox. This alignment would have occurred around 10,500 BC, a date that fits perfectly with the end of the last ice age and the time frame suggested by the water erosion. The head, they argue, was later re-carved into the likeness of a pharaoh, perhaps Khafre, which is why it's too small. If this is true, it changes everything we think we know about ancient history. It would mean that a sophisticated culture, capable of carving a monument on such a massive scale, existed thousands of years before the rise of the pharaohs. It would lend massive support to the idea of a lost, advanced civilization from the Ice Age. Who were the original builders of the Sphinx, if not the ancient Egyptians we know? What was their world like in a time when the Sahara was a green and fertile savanna? And what other secrets from this lost chapter of human history are hiding in plain sight, dismissed by a science that refuses to question its own timeline? Number 15 was Atlantis, a real place. There is no lost city more famous than Atlantis. The story comes to us from the Greek philosopher Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC. He describes Atlantis as a mighty naval power that existed some 9,000 years before his own time. It was an island continent located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is what the ancients called the Strait of Gibraltar. It was a utopian civilization rich in resources and knowledge, with a magnificent capital city built of concentric rings of land and water. But its people became corrupt and greedy. As a punishment, the gods sent one terrible night of fire and earthquakes, and Atlantis sank beneath the sea, lost forever. For most of history, Plato's story was considered just that, a story. A philosophical fable he invented to make a point about the ideal state versus a corrupt one. There is no mention of Atlantis in any other ancient texts that have survived, and no definitive archaeological evidence has ever been found. But the conspiracy or the enduring belief is that Plato was not writing fiction. He was recording a real historical event, passed down to him through his family from the great Athenian statesman Solon, who in turn heard it from Egyptian priests. The search for the real Atlantis has captivated explorers and researchers for centuries. People have claimed to find it everywhere, from the coast of Spain and the Canary Islands to the Caribbean and even Antarctica. One of the most compelling scientific theories links Atlantis to the Minoan civilization on the island of Thera, now known as Santorini in the Aegean Sea. Around 1600 BC, Thera was home to a thriving and advanced culture. Then, a volcanic eruption of almost unimaginable power blew the island apart. It was one of the largest volcanic events in human history, triggering massive tsunamis that would have devastated coastal communities all around the Mediterranean. The Minoan civilization on the nearby island of Crete never recovered. The archaeologist Spiridon Marinatos first proposed this connection in 1939. The parallels are striking. A powerful island civilization destroyed in a single day by a natural disaster. The date is much more recent than Plato's 9,000 years, but some argue that there could have been a translation error from Egyptian records, turning 100% digital 900 months into 9,000 years. Excavations at Akrotiri on Santorini have uncovered a remarkably preserved Minoan city, buried in ash like Pompeii, giving us a glimpse into this sophisticated world. But Thera is inside the Mediterranean, not beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Other researchers look elsewhere. Some point to a submerged landmass called Spartel Bank, just west of the Strait of Gibraltar. Geologists have found evidence that this area was an island until it was submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, around 11,600 years ago. This date matches Plato's timeline almost exactly. Then there is the strange case of the Bimini Road, an underwater rock formation off the coast of the Bahamas. Discovered in 1968, it consists of large rectangular limestone blocks that look like a paved road or the foundation of a wall. The geologists say it's a natural formation, a type of beach rock, but others are convinced it is man-made, a remnant of a lost civilization. The story of Atlantis resonates because it taps into a deep-seated human feeling that we are not the first, that a great civilization came before us and was lost. Whether it was the Minoans, a city off the coast of Spain, or a true continent in the Atlantic, the idea that a high culture could be erased from history overnight is a sobering thought. If Plato's story is true, what knowledge and technology went down with Atlantis? Could there be ruins on the ocean floor waiting to rewrite our history books? And is the story of their fall not just a legend, but a warning about the fragility of our own civilization? Number 14, what did the Knights Templar find in Jerusalem? The Knights Templar were the rock stars of the Middle Ages. Officially known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, they were a Catholic military order founded in 1119. Their mission was to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. For nearly 2 centuries, they were one of the most powerful and wealthy organizations in the world, with a vast network of castles, land, and a fleet of ships. They essentially invented international banking. Then, suddenly, it all came crashing down. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, King Philip IV of France, who was deeply in debt to the Templars, ordered the arrest of every Templar in the country. They were charged with a list of shocking heresies, including spitting on the cross, idol worship, and homosexuality. Under brutal torture, many knights confessed. The order was officially disbanded by Pope Clement V in 1312, and its last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake. The official story is that the Templars had become too powerful, too secretive, and too rich, and a greedy king brought them down. But the conspiracy theory, one that has persisted for 700 years, is that the Templars were destroyed because of something they found. The theory goes back to their very beginnings. For the first 9 years of their existence, there were only 9 knights. And they weren't out protecting pilgrims. According to the records, they spent those 9 years excavating under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the site of Solomon's temple. What were they looking for, and what did they find? This is where the speculation explodes. Some believe they found religious relics of immense power, like the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail. Others suggest they found documents that could shatter the very foundations of the Catholic Church. Perhaps they found proof that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene and had children, a bloodline that survived. This idea was famously explored in the 1982 book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and later in Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. The evidence for this is of course circumstantial but intriguing. When the Templars emerged from those 9 years of digging, their fortunes changed overnight. They received the official backing of the Pope, and donations poured in from across Europe. They grew from 9 men to a massive international corporation in just a few decades. Did they use their discovery to blackmail the church into granting them power and wealth? The charges against them also provide clues. They were accused of worshipping a mysterious head or idol called Baphomet. No one knows what Baphomet was. Some say it was a symbol of esoteric knowledge, perhaps related to Gnosticism or other beliefs that the church considered heretical. It could have been knowledge they brought back from the East, a secret tradition that threatened the authority of Rome. When the king's men raided the Templar treasuries in 1307, they were found to be almost empty. The vast Templar fleet, docked at La Rochelle, had also vanished just before the arrests. Did the knights receive a tip-off? And did they escape, taking their treasure and their secret with them? Stories abound of Templars fleeing to Scotland, where they helped Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn, or to Switzerland, where their expertise in finance helped found the Swiss banking system. Others say they crossed the Atlantic a century before Columbus and buried their treasure on Oak Island in Nova Scotia. The Templars' legacy is undeniable. Their symbols and stories fueled the rise of other secret societies, like the Freemasons. The idea that they possessed a great secret, one worth killing for, has never died. Did the Templars really find something that could change the world under the Temple Mount? If so, was it a physical object or a piece of dangerous knowledge? And if they escaped, where did they go? And does their secret society still exist in some form today? Number 13. Was Shakespeare the man who wasn't there? William Shakespeare, the Bard of Avon. He is, without a doubt, the most famous writer in the English language. His plays, like Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, and Macbeth, are performed all over the world. His words have shaped our language. We know his work intimately. But what do we really know about the man himself? The official story is this: William Shakespeare was born in Stratford upon Avon in 1564. He was the son of a glovemaker. He moved to London and became an actor and a playwright. He achieved great success, became a part owner of the Globe Theatre, retired back to Stratford as a wealthy man, and died in 1616. The problem, and the basis for a conspiracy theory that has raged for over 150 years, is the shocking lack of evidence connecting this man from Stratford to the brilliant plays and poems. There are no letters from him, no manuscripts in his own hand, no records of him being paid for writing a play. The 6 surviving signatures we have of his name are all scrawled and barely legible and spelled in different ways. He seems to have been a businessman, a grain merchant, and a property owner. But a literary genius? The historical record is eerily silent. His own daughters were apparently illiterate. When he died, his will was incredibly detailed, listing his second best bed and his silverware, but it contains no mention of any books, plays, or literary papers whatsoever. It's as if the greatest writer in history owned no books and had no interest in the fate of his own monumental work. This has led to what is known as the Shakespeare authorship question. The theory is that William Shakespeare was a pen name, a front for the real author or authors who for some reason could not take credit for the work. The plays are filled with a deep knowledge of law, philosophy, foreign languages, court politics, and aristocratic sports like falconry. How could a man from a provincial town with a grammar school education have known all of this? So, if not him, then who? There are many candidates. The most popular is Sir Francis Bacon, a brilliant philosopher, scientist, and statesman who served in Queen Elizabeth's court. He had the education, the intellect, and the knowledge of courtly life evident in the plays. The Baconian theory has been around since the mid-19th century. Another leading candidate is Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. He was a highly educated nobleman, a poet, and a patron of a theater company. Events in his own life seem to be mirrored in the plots of the plays, especially Hamlet. As a nobleman, writing for the public theater was considered a lowly profession, which would explain why he would need to use a frontman. This is the Oxfordian theory, and it has been supported by prominent figures like Sigmund Freud and Supreme Court justices. A third contender is Christopher Marlowe, another great playwright of the time. The official story is that Marlowe was killed in a tavern brawl in 1593, but the Marlovian theory suggests his death was faked. He was a spy for the crown and was in deep trouble. The theory posits that he went into hiding and continued to write, using the actor William Shakespeare as his cover. The Shakespeare establishment, of course, dismisses all of this as snobbery. They argue that it's an insult to believe a man of humble origins couldn't be a genius. They say the lack of records is not unusual for that time period, but the questions remain. The gap between the man from Stratford and the author of the plays is, for many, just too wide to ignore. Could the greatest literary figure in history be a complete fabrication? Was Shakespeare a committee of writers, or one brilliant nobleman hiding his identity? And if so, what other facts of history are merely convenient stories we have agreed to believe? Number 12 was the burning of the Library of Alexandria, a deliberate act of suppression. The Library of Alexandria was the intellectual heart of the ancient world. Founded by Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander the Great's generals around 300 BC, it was more than just a library. It was a research institution, a university, museum. It aimed to collect all the knowledge of the world under one roof. At its peak, it is said to have held up to 700,000 scrolls. Scholars from all over the Mediterranean, Greek, Egyptian, and Jewish, came to study there. Think of what was lost. The complete works of Homer, not the edited versions we have today. Hundreds of plays by Sophocles and Euripides, of which we only have a handful. The history of the world written by a Babylonian priest named Berossus. Scientific works by Archimedes and Euclid. It was the single greatest repository of knowledge in human history, and then it was gone. The common story is that the library was destroyed in a single catastrophic fire. Often, Julius Caesar is blamed. During his siege of Alexandria in 48 BC, he set fire to the Egyptian fleet in the harbor. The fire, so the story goes, spread to the city and accidentally burned the library down. It's a tragic accident, a casualty of war, but the conspiracy theory suggests it wasn't an accident, and it may not have been a single event. The destruction of the library may have been a long, deliberate process, an act of cultural and intellectual suppression designed to control history and knowledge. The idea is that the knowledge contained in the library was dangerous to those in power, whether they were Roman emperors or later zealous religious leaders. Let's look at the evidence. The single fire story is likely a myth. The library, or rather the larger institution it was part of, the Museum, seems to have survived Caesar's fire, though it may have been damaged. The real decline appears to have been gradual. In the 3rd century AD, the Roman Emperor Aurelian destroyed the part of the city where the main library was located during a war. What was left was likely housed in a daughter library at the Serapeum, a temple to the god Serapis. This is where the story gets darker. In 391 AD, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I, a fervent Christian, ordered the destruction of all pagan temples throughout the empire. The Patriarch of Alexandria, a man named Theophilus, led a mob of Christians who sacked and destroyed the Serapeum. It's highly likely that any remaining scrolls were destroyed then, seen as heretical pagan knowledge. The final blow may have come in 642 AD, when the city was conquered by a Muslim army. According to one account, the commanding general, on the orders of the caliph, had the remaining scrolls used as fuel to heat the city's bathhouses, saying, "If what is written in them agrees with the book of God, they are not required. If it disagrees, they are not desired." So it wasn't one accidental fire, it was a series of deliberate destructions, motivated by war, political power, and religious intolerance. The theory is that this was a conscious effort to erase the past and control the future. What kind of knowledge was in that library? Perhaps histories that contradicted the official Roman or Christian narratives. Scientific knowledge that was far more advanced than we realize. The ancient world had steam engines, the Eolipol, analog computers, the Antikythera mechanism, and a deep understanding of astronomy. Was there more? Knowledge of electricity, medicine, maps of the world from a time before the ice melted. By destroying the library, the new powers of the world, first Rome and then the organized church, could effectively hit the reset button on history. They could create their own version of the past, their own science, their own truth. We live in the world they built. The dark ages that followed the fall of Rome may not have been an accident of history, but a manufactured state of ignorance. What specific books or scrolls were targeted for destruction first? How much advanced scientific knowledge was deliberately wiped out, setting human progress back by 1,000 years? And is it possible that some of the most important scrolls were smuggled out and saved, hidden away in a secret repository that still exists today? Number 11. Are we living in a lie? Called the phantom time hypothesis. This is one of the most mind-bending theories out there. It doesn't just question an event in history, it questions history itself. The phantom time hypothesis, proposed in the early 1990s by a German historian named Heribert Illig, claims that 297 years of the early Middle Ages, from 614 AD to 911 AD, never happened. They were completely fabricated. According to Illig, the entire Carolingian dynasty, including its most famous ruler Charlemagne, is a fiction. He argues that the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, in collusion with Pope Sylvester II, wanted to be ruling in the momentous year of 1000 AD. But when they checked the calendar in their time, the late 900s, they realized it was only the 700s. So they simply invented 3 centuries of history, complete with heroes, wars, and historical events, to push the calendar forward. This sounds insane, but Illig and his supporters point to what they claim is real evidence. First, there's a problem with the calendar. The Julian calendar, which was in use at the time, had a slight error. It was a few minutes too long each year. And by the 1500s, this error had added up to about 10 days. Pope Gregory XIII fixed this in 1582 by creating the Gregorian calendar and skipping 10 days. But Illig did the math. He calculated that a 10-day discrepancy would have taken about 1,300 years to accumulate. But the Julian calendar had only been in use for about 1,600 years. There was a gap of about 300 years that were unaccounted for. His solution, those 300 years never existed. Second, he points to a scarcity of archaeological evidence from that specific period. He claims there is a suspicious lack of artifacts and building remains dated to between 614 and 911 AD. The architecture of the time, known as Romanesque, seems to spring up in the 10th century with a level of sophistication that seems to come from nowhere, as if it is a direct successor to Roman architecture, without the supposed centuries of development in between. Third, there are inconsistencies in historical records. Illig argues that there are too many documents from the period that look like forgeries, created later to back up the invented timeline. He points to the political and religious turmoil of the period, and suggests it was a perfect time to rewrite history to suit the political aims of the Holy Roman Empire and the papacy. Mainstream historians, as you can imagine, reject this theory completely. They have plenty of evidence to show that the period is real. They point to astronomical records from the time, like observations of Halley's Comet and solar eclipses, which match the established timeline. They cite historical records from outside of Europe, like the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world, which show a continuous history that overlaps with the supposed phantom time. They also have a mountain of archaeological and textual evidence that Illig simply dismisses or reinterprets. The calendar discrepancy, they say, can be explained by the fact that the early calculations of the Julian era weren't perfect. The lack of archaeological evidence is not unusual for the so-called Dark Ages, which was a period of decline and ruralization in Western Europe. But the theory persists because it's so audacious. It suggests the ultimate conspiracy that the very timeline of our world has been manipulated. It turns a huge chunk of what we learn in school into a historical novel written by a power-hungry emperor and a pope. It's a radical thought that makes you question the very nature of historical truth. If a conspiracy could invent 300 years of history, what else could it invent? Are there other phantom periods in our past? And how can we ever be sure that the history we read in books is the history that actually happened? Number 10 was Jesus married with a secret bloodline. This is a theory that strikes at the very heart of Christian belief. The traditional story presents Jesus as a divine figure, celibate, who died on the cross, was resurrected, and ascended to heaven. His legacy is a spiritual one, carried on by his disciples and the church. But a persistent alternative history, or a conspiracy theory, suggests that this is only part of the story, a version carefully edited to suit the political needs of the early Roman Church. The theory posits that Jesus was not a divine being in the way he is now portrayed, but a mortal man, a prophet, and a political leader. And crucially, he was married. His wife, according to this theory, was his most devoted follower, Mary Magdalene. She is a controversial figure in the Gospels. In the official version, she is often portrayed as a repentant prostitute. But in other non-canonical texts, known as the Gnostic Gospels, she is depicted as Jesus' most beloved disciple, the one to whom he entrusted his most profound teachings. The Gnostic Gospel of Philip, discovered in 1945 as part of the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt, contains a particularly explosive passage. It says that the Lord loved Mary Magdalene more than all the other disciples and used to kiss her often on her nearest. While scholars debate the meaning of this passage, proponents of the theory see it as clear evidence of an intimate physical relationship. The theory then goes a step further. It claims that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had one or more children. After the crucifixion, a pregnant Mary Magdalene, fearing for her life and the life of her unborn child, fled the Holy Land. She is said to have traveled to Gaul, which is now modern-day France. There, her child, the heir to a sacred bloodline, was born and raised in secret. This bloodline, known as the Sangreal or Holy Grail from the Old French Sangreal, which could be interpreted as Sangreal or royal blood, is said to have continued through the centuries, mixing with French noble families, particularly the Merovingian kings, who ruled France in the early Middle Ages. The secret of this bloodline was supposedly protected by secret societies, most famously the Knights Templar and later the Priory of Sion. This entire narrative was brought into the mainstream by the 1982 book Holy Blood, Holy Grail by Michael Bagan, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. They pieced together clues from local legends in the south of France, Gnostic texts, and the history of the Templars to construct this elaborate theory. Dan Brown's novel The Da Vinci Code later fictionalized and popularized these ideas for a global audience. The evidence is, of course, highly controversial. The Priory of Sion, a key part of the modern story, was exposed as a hoax created in the 1950s. The interpretation of Gnostic texts is open to debate, and there is no direct historical proof of a marriage or a child. However, the theory taps into some real historical questions. Why was Mary Magdalene's role so downplayed, even villainized, by the early church? The establishment of a celibate, male-dominated priesthood under the Roman Emperor Constantine in the 4th century would have been threatened by the existence of a wife and a hereditary succession. It was politically necessary to erase the feminine and the human from Jesus' story to cement the church's power. By branding alternative gospels as heresy and destroying them, the church could control the narrative. Was Jesus a husband and a father, and was his true legacy a physical bloodline, not just a spiritual church? Did the Catholic Church deliberately suppress this truth to establish its own power? And could the descendants of Jesus be alive today, unaware of their own incredible ancestry? Number 9, what was the real purpose of Stonehenge? On the Salisbury Plain in England stands a circle of giant stones, Stonehenge. It is one of the most famous and mysterious prehistoric monuments in the world. The official archaeological story is that it was built in several stages over a period of about 1,500 years, starting around 3000 BC. It was a burial ground, it was a place of ritual, it was a massive undertaking requiring the transport of giant bluestones from mountains in Wales over 150 miles away. But the question that has always haunted Stonehenge is why? Why did these ancient people go to such incredible effort to build this specific structure in this specific place? The idea that it was just a temple or a cemetery feels incomplete. It doesn't explain the incredible astronomical alignments. The conspiracy or alternative theory is that Stonehenge was something much more than a temple. It was a sophisticated device, a machine. Its purpose was far more advanced than we give our ancestors credit for. One of the first to popularize this idea was the astronomer Gerald Hawkins. In his 1965 book, Stonehenge Decoded, he used early computers to analyze the alignments of the stones. He found that the monument could be used to predict a wide range of astronomical events, including solstices, equinoxes, and even eclipses. It was, he argued, an astronomical observatory, an ancient computer for tracking the movements of the sun and moon. This idea, while controversial at first, is now widely accepted, but other theories go much further. Some researchers believe it was a center for healing. In 2008, archaeologists found that many of the skeletons buried at the site showed signs of serious injury or illness. The bluestones themselves, from the Preseli Hills in Wales, were associated with healing properties in local folklore. Perhaps Stonehenge was a place of pilgrimage, a kind of prehistoric Lourdes, where people came to be healed by the power of the stones. A more radical theory suggests Stonehenge was a sound instrument. Researchers from the University of Salford have studied the acoustics of the site and found that the stone circle has unique sound properties. It can amplify sounds made inside the circle and block them from being heard outside. The stones themselves have resonant properties. Could it have been a giant musical instrument used in ceremonies to create trance-like states or specific sound frequencies for ritual purposes? And then there are the wilder theories. Some have suggested it was a power station designed to harness and channel the Earth's natural energy, known as ley lines. The writer John Michel and others have mapped out networks of these supposed energy lines across Britain, often connecting ancient sacred sites. In this view, Stonehenge is a key node in a global energy grid. Like the mainstream view today is a mix of all the more grounded theories. It was a place for the dead, a ceremonial site, and an astronomical calendar, all tied to the cycles of the sun and the seasons. It was a place where heaven and earth met, but the core mystery remains. How did a Neolithic people, with no written language and supposedly simple tools, possess such a sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, engineering, and acoustics? The effort required was immense, suggesting its purpose was of the absolute highest importance to their society. Was Stonehenge simply a calendar, or was it something more? Could it have been a machine whose true function we have completely lost? And what does its existence say about the forgotten technological and spiritual capabilities of our ancient ancestors? Number 8. Did a lost Roman legion end up in China? In 53 BC, the Roman Republic suffered one of its most humiliating defeats. At the Battle of Carrhae, in what is now Turkey, an army of around 40,000 Romans, led by the wealthy general Crassus, was crushed by a smaller but more mobile Parthian force. Crassus was killed, and the Roman standards, their revered eagle emblems, were captured. It was a disaster. According to the historian Pliny the Elder, about 10,000 Roman legionaries were taken prisoner. Their fate is unknown. They disappear from Roman history. The official story is that they were likely killed or spent the rest of their lives as slaves in the Parthian Empire. But a fascinating and persistent theory suggests a different fate for some of these lost soldiers. The theory is that a group of them escaped or were marched east as mercenaries for the Parthians. They kept traveling, fighting their way across Asia until they ended up on the other side of the known world in China. The main proponent of this theory was an Oxford professor of Chinese history named Homer H. Dubs. In the 1950s, Dubs was studying ancient Chinese records. He came across an account of a battle in 36 BC on the western frontier of the Han Dynasty Empire. The Chinese were fighting a confederation of Xiongnu tribes led by a chieftain named Zizi. The Chinese account describes a strange group of soldiers fighting for Zizi. They used a fish scale formation where they locked their shields together in a tight rectangle. This sounds exactly like the famous Roman testudo, or tortoise, formation. The Chinese had never seen anything like it. The account also mentions that Zizi's town was defended by a double wooden palisade, a feature that was characteristic of Roman military camps but not of the local tribes. The Chinese won the battle, captured these strange soldiers, and were impressed by their military discipline. The theory goes that the Han Emperor settled these foreign soldiers in a frontier village to help defend against raids. That village was named Liqian, which Dubs argued was the Chinese transliteration of Alexandria, a common name for cities in the Roman East. For decades, this was just an intriguing historical theory, but in recent years, it has gained new life. The modern-day village of Zhalaizai, in the area where Liqian was located, has become a center of attention. Some of the inhabitants there have features that are considered non-Chinese green or blue eyes, blonde hair, and taller noses. In 2005, genetic testing was carried out. The results showed that some of the villagers had DNA with Caucasian origins. The story became a local sensation. The village now has a Roman-style arch at its entrance. But the scientific and historical community is deeply divided. Skeptics argue that the evidence is thin. The fish scale formation could be a coincidence. The name Liqian could have other origins. And the Caucasian DNA could be explained by the fact that this region was on the Silk Road, a melting pot of different peoples for centuries. But the idea is tantalizing. It connects the two great empires of the ancient world, Rome and China, in a way that official history does not. It paints a romantic and tragic picture of a band of Roman soldiers lost thousands of miles from home, fighting their last battle in a strange and distant land, and then being absorbed into a new culture. Could a group of battle-hardened Roman legionaries really have marched all the way to China? Are the people of Zhalaizai the living descendants of Crassus's lost army? And how many other incredible cross-cultural encounters have been lost to the gaps in our historical records? Number 7. Was the assassination of Julius Caesar about more than just tyranny? Et tu, Brute! These are supposedly the last words of Julius Caesar, uttered as he was stabbed to death on the Ides of March, 44 BC. The story is famous. A group of Roman senators, calling themselves the Liberators, assassinated the dictator Caesar to save the Roman Republic from his tyrannical ambition. Their leaders, Brutus and Cassius, are portrayed, at least in their own minds, as heroes of liberty. That's the official story, the one immortalized by Shakespeare. It's a clean political narrative, tyranny versus freedom. What if it was more complicated than that? A compelling conspiracy theory suggests that the senators were not just high-minded patriots. They were pawns, or at least collaborators, in a much deeper plot, one driven by money, power, and a threat to the entire economic system of the Roman elite. To understand this, you have to look at Caesar's policies. He was a populist. He was wildly popular with the common people and the soldiers. He passed laws to cancel a portion of all debts, which was a huge relief for the masses, but a disaster for the wealthy aristocrats who were the lenders. He reformed the calendar. He planned massive public works projects to create jobs. Most importantly, he planned to reform the state's monetary system. At the time, Rome's money supply was controlled by a small group of wealthy families, the oligarchs. They controlled the minting of coins and grew rich through lending money at exorbitant interest rates. Caesar started to challenge this. He began to mint his own coins, bearing his own image, and asserted the power of the state to create and issue money. This was a direct threat to the power and wealth of the senatorial class, but the theory goes even deeper, connecting Caesar's death to a conspiracy in Egypt. During his time in Alexandria, Caesar had a famous affair with Cleopatra, but he also had access to the legendary Library of Alexandria. Some theorists speculate that he discovered something there, perhaps knowledge of a conspiracy among the Roman elite or financial secrets that could be used to expose their corruption. Even more tantalizing is Caesar's planned next move. At the time of his death, he was about to launch a massive military campaign against the Parthian Empire. This would have taken him away from Rome for years. It would have made him even more powerful and wealthy, and it would have given him an unassailable army loyal only to him. For the senators, it was now or never. The assassination itself was brutal and public, but was it just the final act? The conspiracy theory suggests that the plot was wider than just the 60 or so senators who were directly involved. It implicates the wealthy elite, the moneylenders whose business model Caesar was threatening. They may have financed the conspiracy using the rhetoric of saving the Republic as a convenient cover for their real motive, protecting their financial interests. Ironically, their actions backfired completely. The assassination didn't save the Republic. It plunged Rome into another round of bloody civil wars, which ultimately led to the end of the Republic and the rise of the first emperor, Caesar's heir, Octavian. The very thing they claimed to be fighting against, they brought about. Was Brutus a noble hero or the enforcer for a cabal of angry bankers? Was Caesar's death a political act to save freedom, or a financial hit to protect the profits of the super-rich? And how many major political events in history have been driven by hidden economic motives that are later scrubbed from the official story? Number 6, do the Rosicrucians secretly run the world? In the early 17th century, two mysterious pamphlets appeared in Germany. The first, in 1614, was the Fama Fraternitatis Rosae Crucis. The second, in 1615, was the Confessio Fraternitatis. These documents announced the existence of a secret brotherhood of alchemists and sages called the Order of the Rosy Cross, or the Rosicrucians. The story they told was incredible. The order was founded in the 15th century by a German noble named Christian Rosenkreuz. He had traveled to the Middle East and learned a secret, ancient wisdom, a blend of Egyptian magic, Gnosticism, and alchemy. He returned to Germany and founded a secret society to protect this knowledge and work towards a universal reformation of mankind. The members of this order were said to be able to heal the sick, live for hundreds of years, and possess esoteric knowledge that could transform society. The pamphlets caused a massive stir across Europe. People were fascinated and wanted to join. But no one knew who the Rosicrucians were or how to find them. They were like an invisible college. This led to a huge debate. Were they real, or was it all just an elaborate hoax, a literary allegory? The official historical view is that it was likely a prank or a piece of philosophical fiction created by a small group of German thinkers. There is no hard evidence that an organized Rosicrucian order, as described in the pamphlets, ever existed in the 17th century. But the conspiracy theory says they were, and are, very real. The pamphlets were their public coming out, a way to test the waters and recruit new members. The theory suggests that the Rosicrucians were the heirs to an ancient tradition of secret knowledge, perhaps passed down from the Egyptian mystery schools, through the Gnostics, and maybe even the Knights Templar. Their goal was to secretly guide the development of Western civilization. According to this view, many of the most important figures in science and philosophy were secret Rosicrucians. People like Sir Francis Bacon, who wrote a utopian novel called The New Atlantis, which described a secret society of scientists dedicated to knowledge. Isaac Newton, a known alchemist. René Descartes, Gottfried Leibniz. The theory is that the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment were not just natural historical developments, they were projects orchestrated by the Rosicrucian Brotherhood to move humanity away from religious dogma and towards reason and science. Their influence is said to have continued working behind the scenes of major historical events. They are often linked to the founding of other secret societies, most notably Freemasonry. Many Masonic rituals and symbols have a Rosicrucian flavor. Some believe the Rosicrucians were behind the American and French revolutions, pushing for societies based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. The evidence is all symbolic and circumstantial, found in the art, literature, and architecture of the time. Proponents point to coded messages in paintings, watermarks on books, and the symbolic design of buildings as proof of the Rosicrucians' hidden hand. Today, there are several organizations that call themselves Rosicrucian orders, like Amorc the Ancient and mystical order Rosicrucis. They claim to be the direct descendants of the original Brotherhood and offer to teach its secret wisdom to members. Skeptics see these as modern fraternal organizations with no real connection to the 17th century mystery. But the idea of a secret society of enlightened masters working behind the scenes to guide humanity is a powerful one. It suggests that history is not a series of random events, but a carefully managed plan. Was the original Rosicrucian Brotherhood a real secret society or just a powerful idea? Are they the hidden architects of our modern scientific world? And if they do still exist, what is their plan for humanity's future? Number 5. Where's the Ark of the Covenant? The Ark of the Covenant is arguably the most famous and sought-after lost artifact in history. According to the Old Testament, it was a wooden chest covered in gold, built by the Israelites to the exact specifications given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. It contained the 2 stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. It was not just a container, it was the physical manifestation of God's presence on earth. It was said to have immense power, capable of stopping rivers, destroying armies, and striking down anyone who touched it improperly. The Ark was housed in the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctum of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. But in 587 BC, the Babylonian army, led by King Nebuchadnezzar II, conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and carried the Jewish people into exile. And the Ark vanished. It is never mentioned again in the Bible. What happened to it is one of the greatest mysteries of all time. There are many theories. The simplest is that it was destroyed by the Babylonians along with the temple. But it was such a sacred and important object, it seems unlikely it would have been left to be captured. This leads to the conspiracy theories, which suggest the Ark was saved and hidden. One of the most famous and compelling claims comes from Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims to have the Ark of the Covenant. According to their national epic, the Kebra Nagast, the Queen of Sheba, visited King Solomon and had a son with him named Menelik. When Menelik grew up, he traveled to Jerusalem to meet his father. When he returned to Ethiopia, he secretly took the real Ark with him, leaving a replica behind in the temple. Today, the Ethiopian Church says the Ark is kept in a small chapel, the Chapel of the Tablet, next to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in the city of Axum. It is guarded by a single virgin monk who is chosen for life and is the only person on earth allowed to see it. No one else, not even the head of the church or the prime minister of Ethiopia, can look at it. This makes the claim impossible to verify. Another major theory is that the Ark was hidden by the priests of the temple just before the Babylonian invasion. The prophet Jeremiah, it is said, took the Ark and hid it in a cave on Mount Nebo, the mountain from which Moses saw the Promised Land. Others believe it was hidden in a secret chamber, deep beneath the Temple Mount itself. This is the theory that has fueled speculation that the Knights Templar found the Ark during their excavations there in the 12th century. The 1981 film Raiders of the Lost Ark popularized the idea that the Ark was taken by the Egyptians and hidden in the city of Tanis. There are also theories that it was taken to a Jewish colony on Elephantine Island in Egypt, or that it was carried to Ireland by the prophet Jeremiah. The Lemba, a tribe in southern Africa who claim Jewish ancestry and follow Jewish customs, have a tradition that their ancestors carried the Ark south and hid it. The mystery is so powerful because the Ark is more than a historical artifact. It's a religious object of ultimate power, a direct link to the divine. Its discovery would be the single greatest archaeological find in human history. Was the Ark destroyed by the Babylonians, or was it successfully hidden? Is it sitting in a quiet chapel in Ethiopia, guarded by a lone monk? Or is it buried deep beneath the streets of Jerusalem, waiting to be rediscovered? And if it were found, what would happen to the world? Number 4, were there really giants on the earth? There were giants in the earth in those days. This famous line from the book of Genesis, chapter 6, has sparked imagination and controversy for thousands of years. The passage describes the sons of God interbreeding with the daughters of men, producing a race of powerful beings known as the Nephilim. The idea of giants is not unique to the Bible. Myths and legends from all over the world, from Greek mythology with its titans and cyclopes, to Norse tales of frost giants, to Native American legends, all speak of a time when giant humanoids walked the earth. The official scientific and historical view is that these are just myths, stories created to explain natural phenomena like large boulders or ancient ruins, or simply to tell a good tale. There is no credible physical evidence, they say, for a race of human giants ever existing. But the conspiracy theory argues that this evidence did exist, and it has been deliberately suppressed. The theory claims that in the 19th and early 20th centuries, hundreds of skeletons of giant humanoids ranging from 7 feet to over 12 feet tall were unearthed all over the world, particularly in North America. These discoveries were supposedly reported in local newspapers at the time, but the skeletons themselves mysteriously vanished. The narrative of the conspiracy is that the Smithsonian Institution, the premier scientific establishment in the United States, was at the center of a massive cover-up. The theory claims that the Smithsonian, in an effort to protect the established Darwinian theory of evolution, which depicts a linear progression from smaller, ape-like ancestors to modern humans, systematically seized and destroyed these giant skeletons. The existence of a race of giant, advanced humans in America's past would complicate this neat narrative. There are countless alleged accounts. In 1891, it was reported that scientists from the Smithsonian had found a large stone pyramid in Wisconsin containing the skeleton of a man over 9 feet tall. In 1912, a report claimed that 18 giant skeletons were found in burial mounds, also in Wisconsin. Similar stories emerged from Ohio, California, and other states. These accounts often describe the giants as having double rows of teeth, 6 fingers, and elongated skulls. The problem is that the physical evidence is gone. All we have are these old newspaper clippings, which are difficult to verify and were often prone to sensationalism and hoaxes. There have been many photographic discoveries of giant skeletons that have been exposed as digital fakes, which has further discredited the whole field of research. However, the sheer volume of these old reports and the consistency of the descriptions and myths from different cultures is intriguing. The biblical Nephilim, the Siteka, a tribe of red-haired giants in Paiute oral tradition. The discovery of giant axes and tools that a normal-sized human would struggle to use. But proponents of the theory ask, why would so many different cultures invent such similar stories? And if these newspaper reports from 100 years ago were all hoaxes, why was it such a common theme? The theory suggests that we are being deliberately kept in the dark about a very real and very strange chapter of our planet's history. Are the stories of giants just myths? Or are they a distorted memory of a real race of ancient beings? Was there a massive cover-up by the scientific establishment to hide evidence that contradicts mainstream theories of human origins? And could there still be undiscovered giant skeletons lying in burial mounds or hidden in the basements of museums? Number 3. Who was the man in the iron mask? In the late 17th century, during the long reign of France's Sun King, Louis XIV, a mysterious prisoner was held in a series of state prisons, including the infamous Bastille. No one knew his name. He was always held under the highest security, and he was forced to wear a mask. This mask, described as being made of black velvet, not iron, has become legendary. The prisoner died in 1703 and was buried under a false name. All his belongings were destroyed. The identity of the man in the iron mask is one of France's greatest historical mysteries. Who was this person, and what crime did he commit that required his identity to be erased so completely, while still keeping him alive for decades? The famous writer and philosopher Voltaire was one of the first to popularize the story. He was imprisoned in the Bastille himself in the early 18th century and heard tales of the mysterious prisoner from older inmates. Voltaire claimed the man was a nobleman, and most sensationally that he was the older, illegitimate brother of Louis XIV. This theory evolved into the most famous and romantic one of all, that the prisoner was the identical twin brother of Louis XIV. The story, later written by Alexandre Dumas in his novel The Vicomte de Bragelonne, goes like this. Louis XIII and his wife Anne of Austria had twin sons. To avoid a civil war over the succession, the second-born twin was hidden away and raised in secret. When he grew up and discovered his royal identity, he had to be imprisoned for life to protect the throne of his brother. This would explain why he was treated relatively well, with good food and books, but could never be allowed to show his face. There is, of course, no direct historical evidence for Louis XIV having a twin. But the theory persists because it so perfectly explains the strange circumstances of the prisoner's confinement. Historians have proposed many other candidates. One leading theory is that the man was an Italian diplomat named Ercole Antonio Mattioli. He had double-crossed Louis XIV in a secret negotiation to buy a strategic fortress. The furious king had him kidnapped and imprisoned for life. The problem with this theory is that Mattioli is known to have died in a different prison, and his imprisonment was not particularly secret. Another candidate is Eustache Dagger, a man arrested in 1669 for reasons that are still unclear. He seems to be the most likely historical person to be the man in the mask, but his identity is so obscure that it's an anticlimax. Why would a minor figure require such extraordinary secrecy? Some theories suggest he was a valet who was involved in a major political scandal and knew too much. The conspiracy theory angle suggests that the secret was so deep, so dangerous to the state, that all evidence had to be purged. Perhaps the prisoner was the real father of Louis XIV, making the king illegitimate. Or maybe he was the son of some other high-ranking figure whose existence would have caused a massive scandal at court. The level of secrecy was extreme. The guards were under orders to kill him if he ever tried to speak to anyone or remove his mask. The mystery is not just who he was, but why the French state went to such incredible lengths for over 30 years to hide one man's face. Was the man in the iron mask the king's twin brother, a secret that could have torn France apart? Was he a disgraced diplomat or a lowly servant who stumbled upon a terrible state secret? And will we ever know the truth, or was the cover-up so perfect that his identity is lost to history forever? Number 2 was the sinking of the Titanic, an elaborate plot. On the night of April 14th, 1912, the RMS Titanic, the largest and most luxurious ship in the world, struck an iceberg on its maiden voyage and sank into the freezing Atlantic. Over 1,500 people lost their lives. It is one of the most famous disasters in history. The official story is a tragic tale of human arrogance, a series of mistakes, and a fatal encounter with nature. The ship was going too fast, there weren't enough lifeboats, the warnings about ice were ignored. But a dark and persistent conspiracy theory suggests that the sinking of the Titanic was no accident. It was a deliberate act of mass murder, orchestrated by some of the most powerful men in the world to achieve a specific political and financial goal, the creation of the United States Federal Reserve. The theory centers on the powerful banker J.P. Morgan. Morgan was the driving force behind the creation of the Federal Reserve, a private central bank that would control the American money supply. He had been pushing for this for years, along with other powerful financial families like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. However, there was powerful opposition to the plan. 3 of the wealthiest and most influential men in America were staunchly against the creation of a central bank: John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus. And here is the core of the conspiracy. All 3 of these men were on the Titanic for its maiden voyage, and all 3 of them died when it sank. J.P. Morgan, who owned the White Star Line, the company that built the Titanic, was also scheduled to be on the voyage. But he canceled at the last minute. The theory claims that the Titanic was deliberately sunk to eliminate these 3 key opponents of the Federal Reserve. With them out of the way, the path was clear. And indeed, in December 1913, just over a year and a half after the Titanic sank, the Federal Reserve Act was passed and the bank was created. But the theory gets even more detailed. It suggests that the ship that sank was not the Titanic at all. It was its almost identical sister ship, the RMS Olympic. The Olympic had been in service for a year and had been involved in a serious collision, leaving it badly damaged and a financial liability for the White Star Line. The theory, known as the ship switch theory, proposes that the 2 ships were secretly swapped. The damaged Olympic, disguised as the brand new Titanic, was sent out on its maiden voyage with the plan to sink it in a minor incident, allowing the company to collect a massive insurance payout on a new ship while getting rid of a damaged one. But the plan went horribly wrong. Instead of a small controlled incident where everyone could be rescued by nearby ships, the collision with the iceberg caused catastrophic damage, and the ship sank too quickly, leading to the massive loss of life. Proponents of this theory point to supposed differences in the ship's appearances in photographs. And they also point to the strange behavior of the nearby ship, the SS Californian, which allegedly saw the Titanic's distress rockets, but did nothing for hours. Was it under orders not to intervene? Skeptics and maritime historians have debunked most of these claims. They argue that switching two massive ocean liners would have been an impossibly complex and public undertaking. The financial motive doesn't hold up, as the insurance payout was a fraction of the ship's value. And the idea that a group of bankers would murder 1,500 people just to pass a bill seems outlandish. The key figures canceling their trip was not uncommon, yet the theory endures. It's a chilling narrative that turns a tragic accident into a cold-blooded conspiracy. It suggests that the levers of power are controlled by a ruthless cabal who will stop at nothing to achieve their aims. Was the sinking of the Titanic a tragic accident or the deadliest assassination plot in history? Were Astor, Guggenheim, and Strauss the real targets? And how much of our financial and political history has been shaped by events that were planned in secret, far from the public eye? Number 1. What does the Antikythera mechanism tell us about lost technology? In the year 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers discovered an ancient Roman shipwreck off the coast of the island of Antikythera. Among the statues and pottery they recovered was a strange, corroded lump of bronze. It sat in a museum, largely ignored, for decades. But when scientists began to examine it more closely in the 1950s, and again with modern X-ray and scanning technology in the early 2000s, they made one of the most astonishing discoveries in the history of archaeology. That lump of bronze was a machine, a complex, sophisticated machine of interlocking gears, dials, and pointers. It's called the Antikythera mechanism, and it has completely rewritten our understanding of the technological capabilities of the ancient world. The official view of ancient technology used to be that it was relatively simple. Levers, pulleys, ramps. The idea of intricate, precision-geared machinery was thought to be a product of the European clockmakers of the 14th century. The Antikythera mechanism proves this was wrong. The device dates to around 100 to 200 BC. It is a full 1,500 years more advanced than anything else we've ever found from that period. There's nothing else like it. It is a complete anomaly. So what did it do? After decades of study, researchers have figured out that it was an astronomical computer. It was an incredibly sophisticated analog computer used to predict the positions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets that were then known. It could predict eclipses, track the phases of the moon, and even had a dial to show the timing of the ancient Olympic Games. The complexity of its gear trains is stunning, even including a differential gear, an invention that was not thought to have been reinvented until the 16th century. The existence of this single object raises a profound question: where is all the other stuff? A device this complex could not have been a one-off invention. It must have been the product of a long tradition of mechanical engineering. There must have been workshops, masters, and apprentices. There must have been simpler, earlier versions of the device, and probably more complex, later ones. But we have found none of them. It's like finding a single laptop from 100 BC. This leads to the conspiracy, or the alternative history theory, that the ancient world possessed a level of technology far beyond what we know, and that this knowledge has been lost. The Antikythera mechanism is the only piece of this technology that has survived by sheer luck. What happened to this knowledge? The theory often ties back to the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Was the knowledge of how to build these devices, the blueprints, the manuals, all contained on scrolls that were burned? Did the fall of Rome and the subsequent Dark Ages lead to a complete collapse of this technological tradition, so thorough that it was utterly forgotten for over a millennium? It suggests that our historical timeline of progress is wrong. We didn't move in a straight line from simple to complex. Instead, humanity may have reached a high level of technological sophistication, then lost it all, and had to spend the next 1,500 years slowly relearning what the ancient Greeks already knew. Think about what this implies. If they could build a mechanical computer of this complexity, what else could they build? Were there other machines for navigation, for calculation, for automation? The Roman writer Cicero mentions a similar device built by Archimedes that could model the solar system. Was this a whole field of lost science? The Antikythera mechanism is not a theory. It's a real object that you can see in a museum in Athens. It is a piece of hard evidence that our understanding of the past is incomplete. How could such a sophisticated technology just disappear from the historical record without a trace? What other incredible inventions from the ancient world are still waiting to be found at the bottom of the sea or buried under the ground? And what does it say about our own civilization that a whole field of advanced knowledge could be so completely and utterly lost?